All right, in this demo, we're going to be going over AutoCAD. This is going to be a basics lecture, so we're only going to be talking about tools and how to use them in this. In some further demos later this week and next week, we're going to be getting into actual implementation. So, yeah, we'll be jumping into that later. This is, again, just going to be a simple demo. So I highly recommend you guys follow along. Make sure you're going along with the lecture guide too. It's got some more information that may be handy. So here we are on the main screen. We're starting a new file, but we can't open a new file if we want. We also have this tab right here where we could browse templates. We're not going to do that. We're just going to start with a default template. So I'll go ahead and hit new, and it will drop me into here. And this is the main working space for AutoCAD. Couple things I'd like to point out is that we have this top bar here with main menu options, and then we have this area here, which is the context sensitive menu bar. What that means is that as I change through here, the options that are displayed here are going to change as well. Also, if I click on a tool like this hatch tool, it'll actually change this bar as well, and we'll see that we'll get this separate window that pops up from everything else. To get out of a tool and pretty much anything in AutoCAD, you can hit escape, and if possible, it will close that. And you can see that that unique tool little pop-up window went away. Excuse me. All right, so a couple other things. I don't know how some people manage to do it, but occasionally this button gets activated, and you can see that you'll end up with a minimized toolbar up here. If you just keep clicking that, it will eventually cycle back to the standard one. We also have tabs up here, so if you have multiple tabs or multiple projects you're working on or files you're working on, you can switch through here or back to the start menu. We also have this area down here. Right now we're working in the model space, which is this dark area. Anytime you're on one of these white areas with the gray area in the background, this is called paper space. So right now we have, just by default, we have two tabs of paper space, and then we have our model space. We also have a couple settings down here. We'll be talking about those. But the main thing I want to talk about is this little area for entering text. That's called dynamic input, and right now you can see if I was to click in this area here, you see I have that little sub menu that pops off on my cursor. That's called dynamic input. You can change this by typing DYN mode, and I think setting it to 0 completely removes it, whereas if I do 3, I can bring it back. So 3. And now it's back on my cursor there. You can also hit F12. I will not be doing that. There's a reason. It stops my recording software, and there's a reason why we're on drawing 6 right now. Okay, so those are kind of the main areas. We'll be getting more into the command bar and entering stuff as we go. So the first thing I want to talk about is units. Anytime you start a new drawing, check the units. And the easiest way to do that is to just type units, and hit enter, and it'll pop up this drawing units menu. If you really want to, you can click on the AutoCAD symbol here, go to drawing utilities, and then units is here as well. And there's a couple different things in here. Again, I list them more out in detail in the handout, but the thing that really only matters for us is changing this from decimal to architectural. We'll go into precision in another lecture, and just go ahead and leave this direction at 0. You can change a bunch of settings in AutoCAD, but I have a friend who's got a coworker, and she's tried to work with this coworker on his terminal, and he's got so many custom settings that she says it's completely impossible. She has to walk him through things because he's changed so many settings that she can't actually function on his terminal. So generally you want to leave change as few settings so that you can work on each other's computers and not have anything crazy go on. So once we've changed this from decimal to architectural, we can go ahead and hit OK, and that's done. Now, movement. So we can zoom in and out with the mouse wheel. We can also hold down the mouse wheel and pan. The zoom is going to work relative to the cursor, so if I zoom out near the origin here and zoom in over here, I'm now further away centered from the origin there. So those are kind of your two main ways you can move around. Another option, I'm just going to draw a line here, we'll talk about that in a second, is to zoom extents. So occasionally something weird will happen and you'll end up, I've seen people like glitched way out here where they're like, I can't see my project, and then I check and a line that long is bigger than the earth or something, right? So zoom extents is a great way to do that. And so this will be our first time where we're entering keyboard commands for this. So I'll hit Z, which will bring up this menu again. And I can type Z as a shortcut, or I can type the whole word of zoom. That'll bring up this menu here, and it lets us, the text window itself says specify corner of window, so we can manually select an area to zoom into like that. Or we have these options down here, and each of these is functions not only as a button, but also the blue letter that is in each of those is a shortcut you can enter. So what I can do is I can hit E, enter, and it will zoom into the extents of my drawing. That's pretty helpful in case you get somehow lost or a weird zoom happens. I've also seen some people zoom too close, which is weird, but it happens. So zoom extents is your friend in case you kind of get lost and need to figure out where your drawing is. All right, so I've got a line here. Let's go ahead and bring up another line tool, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit L. Again, you can type the full L-I-N-E, or you can click on the line tool up here, but L, enter, is a pretty quick way to get this tool up and going. All right, so you can see right now, as I move around, we have a set of coordinates. The first box is going to be X, and the second one is going to be Y, just like geometry class, right? I can manually click anywhere in here and start placing points. I can also manually type where I want something to go. So let's say that I want something to this line to start at 10 foot, 10 foot. So that's 10 foot, 10 foot right there. As soon as I move this mouse, you can see that I can also choose different settings here. So what I can do is snap, and you can see how it's got that little green arrow or green line right there. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I can choose a direction to go in and then type a distance. So let's say I want to go up this weird angle at 10 feet. Oops. Then I can just type 10 feet and hit enter. When you're doing this text entry, you have to do the foot symbol for feet. So if I want to go 3'6" in this direction, I would type 3 and then the foot, and then I can just do 6 without inches. And you can put the inches in there and it'll work, but you can also just do 3'6" without having to do the inches and you get the same thing. All right. There is one other option that I would like to highlight to you guys, and that is if I was to start a line here, what I can do is say, let's say I want to go 12 degrees at an angle of, or 12 feet at an angle of 7 degrees. So again, remember, east is going to be 7 degrees, so this should only go a tiny bit up in that direction. And I have to do the angle and then 7. Oh, I may have screwed it up by going back there. Let's see if it knows. Okay, yeah. So this went that 12 feet, and then this is an angle of 7 degrees up is what it went right here. So if I start another one, you can see that we went out 12 feet, and then the angle right there is at 7 degrees. So you can do manual entry like that. That kind of comes in handy when you're doing things like dormers, where you know you've got kind of like a wall going along in some area, and then you've got a dormer that's, you know, it's going to be, each side is going to be 2'6", and it's going to be at 35 degrees or something. Then you can do that to place it instead of kind of messing around with other settings. And then you can build it out from there as you like. So, but that's the line tool, placing lines, whatnot. Sometimes you want to kind of pause a tool, and when I'm using AutoCAD, I'm kind of resting I've got my right hand on the mouse, and then I'm resting my left hand kind of over the left side of the keyboard. So I've got one finger near the escape, and then one near the space bar. And the reason why I keep my thumb on the space bar at all times is because you can repeat the last thing you did with the space bar. So I just did a line tool right there. If I hit space bar, it brings up the line tool again, and I can click through. And then if I want to stop using the line tool, I can hit space bar again. It'll stop the tool. And if I hit space bar again, it'll resume the tool. And if I want to do a series of lines like that, I can keep kind of toggling the tool on and off with space bar without having to do like L, enter, hit escape, come back up here, do that, hit escape. You know, so I think it's very convenient placing for your left hand to kind of be in that area, and you can work a lot quicker with a lot of these tools. So zoom, line tool, spacebar. Okay, there's undo and what I call the undo trap. So you can see we've got all these things here. Undo, what you're used to is undo reverses actions. But AutoCAD kind of considers everything you do to be an action. So me zooming here is an action according to AutoCAD. It's not necessarily logging all of them, but it will take you back to a certain point. So if I start hitting Control Z, or we can hit the button up here that does the same thing. So if I'm hitting Control Z, you can see not only is it removing stuff, but in a second here, it's also going to move me around, right? Well, keep an eye down here because something's about to happen that screwed up a couple people in the past too. So I'm hitting Control Z, I'm about back to where I started, right? Well, right there, you can see that I undid the units. And I've had a couple students where they started working on something early on in the project, got to a certain point, said, no, I don't want to do that, Control Z'd a bit, and now when they go to place a line, you can see that I'm back in decimal mode for the distance. This is no longer in feet and inches. So you can actually unset your units command that you did earlier on with enough Control Z. So we'll go back in there and set that, but that's just an example of something I want you guys to watch out for is undo. You can undo certain things with the undo tool that you wouldn't normally think you could with other software, right? Okay, let's go ahead and talk about these buttons down here on the right. I don't really have this in the thing, but there's grid mode right here, which is this grid that's in the background. You can turn that on and off. This other one here is snap mode. This should generally be off for the most part. This will mess up some people from time to time because it will only let you kind of snap to certain points that are on that grid. So you can see it's only going to let me snap to my grid here. Generally, I work with that off, and then we'll keep this grid on right here. When we're talking about viewports out here, and again, we'll get into detail on this later, you would double click into the viewport here and then turn the grid off there. But again, we'll cover viewports more in detail towards the end of this. So these next couple buttons here, this is going to be ortho mode, this just sort of right angle thing looking button. So if I start drawing a line, you can see that I can go any distance and I can go at pretty much any angle that I want to. If we turn ortho mode on, it's only going to snap to right angles. So that's just orthographic projection right there. That changes between the polar tracking option right here. So if I turn one on, the other one's off because they do different things, opposite things really. If we click on this little down arrow right here, we can see that we can actually set some of these different angles. So your default's going to be every 45 degrees. If I set it to 30 degrees, now it's going to snap at 0, 30, 60, 90. You can even go as fine as 5 degrees, though you're pretty much kind of hurting yourself with that. 45 is fine for the most part. Sometimes you might need to go to 15. Just be aware that you can do this, but I would leave this on. Okay, so the next thing is going to be object snap tracking, which is this one right here, and then there's object snap. These two buttons, again, kind of work in conjunction. So if I draw some lines right here, what this first one is going to do is it's going to give me little highlights about things. So if I was to hover here, you can see I get that green box, but then if I move away from it, I get that green dashed line. And so the snap tracking will give me different things that will be relative to the points I highlight. So if I want to get something that's 90 degrees off of here in this direction, I can do that. We can also get extensions. So if this line was to be virtually extended, where would this midpoint here coming out this way and this extension meet up? And it would be right there. The second box, the object snap itself, has all these different settings. So we've got endpoint, midpoint, center, intersection, and extension. So just to show you guys what those are, this is an endpoint, this is a midpoint, this is an extension. We need a circle. We'll do circles later too. If you hover on the edge of a circle, the center becomes visible, and you can grab the center right there. And then, intersections. So we have endpoint, midpoint, and then this right here where these lines intersect obviously is an intersection. So this set of tools is pretty much how I always work. You can turn them on and off at your own risk, but I would highly recommend keeping them on in this pattern. All right. So we've used the line tool now. We've placed a couple lines. The other option is going to be the Polyline Tool. And so what this does is creates a joined set of lines. So I have this shape right here. Each of these is individual lines. If I select them, you can see that the middle box is a square just like the edges are. This, on the other hand, is a joined set of lines. The endpoints are going to be squares, but the midpoints are going to be these little thin rectangles. We can move the points around, but if we were to do something like that over here, I mean, we can still move the points around, but it's going to work a little bit differently. So like I can grab that midpoint right there, whereas I can't really do anything with that one right there. And I can physically move that away from here, whereas again, these are all joined in a group. If something is joined in a group, you can explode it. So we can take this and explode it. And now each of these lines is an individual line, just like this set was. Similarly, we can take this and do join, and now this functions just as if it was a polyline that I created. So there's a couple different ways you can manage that. Joins are different than groups. So if I have, let's take this set of lines right here. If I was to group this, the difference between a group is going to be this kind of box around it. That's visually how you tell the difference between a group and then this, which is a joined set of lines. Once something is grouped, you would type ungroup to ungroup it, and you can see that this is still joined because to unjoin, because you have to unjoin, unjoin. Oh, right, explode. You have to explode to unjoin that, whereas this was a group and I had to ungroup it. So there's two sets of things, slightly different commands for them. Okay, let's talk about selection. So you guys have seen me kind of selecting things here. There's two main types of selection. There's going to be left to right, which is going to use this blue area right here, and there's right to left, which is going to be this green. If I select over something, and this is a, just to clarify too, this is a click and then move the mouse, whereas you can click and drag and you get this kind of free-form shape. You can do the opposite direction and you will get the green shape. It depends on which direction if you're doing the click and drag. So if I go off just a tiny bit to the right, it locks me into the blue mode, even if I go way out in a different direction. Similarly, if I do that and go out to the right, or sorry, to the left, it locks me in this mode. So there's, so the green selection, or sorry, the blue selection is going to be, it grabs anything you fully go over. You can see here as I kind of move across there, certain things highlight as they would, indicating that they would get added to that selection. Whereas if I go right to left, you can see that as soon as I touch something, it gets added to that selection. All right. Hit escape to deselect whatever you are on. Selections become really important later on, and it's yeah, we'll kind of go into how some things are selected. All right, let me see here. So the offset tool. So this is our kind of first tool that we're going to be using. It's going to be up in the menu, I believe, right here. Yeah. And what the offset tool does is offsets things. So if I have this line right here, I can type O. O will usually bring you the offset tool, and then just hit enter. So just like with the line or with some of the other tools, we have, you know, different things right here. Our default right now is going to say specify offset distance. So I'm going to say, let's say I want to offset this 3 feet. So I can just type 3 feet, enter. And now whatever I whichever side I have the mouse on, it's going to offset it in that direction. Once I do that, it's going to deselect that tool and I can select another one to offset in that direction. If I want to keep doing that, so let me grab this again, enter, and then let's say I want to change the distance. I can type 2 feet and now we'll be offsetting 2 feet. I can also do M, which will bring it into multiple modes. So now when I do this, I can keep offsetting this out 2 feet at a time. All right. Another thing is, if you were to start this offset tool and you're happy with that, again, you can hit spacebar and it will keep that same distance. So I didn't have to take my hand and move over and hit enter. I can just hit spacebar to use the previous setting for the tool. So just there it is, specify offset distance, spacebar, select, and it does that one. Okay. Trim. So let me throw up a polyline here, and we'll just do 10 feet, 10 feet, 10 feet, and then to close a polyline tool, you can just type CL and it'll close that off as a shape. So here's a difference that I want to highlight. Let me get another set here. This is for me to show you guys something. So if I have a 10 by 10 box here of lines, and then so this one right here is just lines. These are all individual. This one is a polyline. The offset tool is going to work with these in different ways. So if I offset this 6 inches, I can go inside or I can go outside. If I do the same thing over here, it's going to be doing this in different. Come on, there we go. I have to do each of these individually, right? So one way that I used to lay out my floor plans, still do, is if I knew what my exterior dimensions were, I would do the entire perimeter of the whole structure, join them, and then offset them in one step. And so you could be left, depending on which one, let's say this was my exterior walls, I could offset it 6 inches in, and I'm good to go. Alternatively, if I somehow knew what my interior wall finish faces were, I could offset 6 inches towards the exterior. So you can see that I have 2 different results from that. So there's one reason why, that's why you might want to use a polyline or create lines and join them versus just trying to do individual lines like this. But if you ended up in this situation, there's also the fillet or the fillet tool, which is going to be this one right here in the menu. Usually you can do FIL and it'll bring that up. And what this does is it creates a rounded blend between 2 lines. So right now I have a couple options here. We'll go ahead and hit R to set the radius, and we'll do 6 inches for the radius. So if I click on this and click on that, I now have a 6-inch radius here, which it should be for actually the whole size of this. That should match this because I offset that 6 inches. So let's do this again. We'll set the radius to 3 inches this time. And then we'll click, and you can see that this is now a smaller angle than that one was. See how it's only going to be 3 inches from where they would have theoretically joined? A handy way when you have openings like this that you don't want to take the time to sit here and go, oh, I need to match this, and we'll get this. And there, we join those together. That's a bit of a slower way. What you can do is just type FIL, R, R, and then 0. And a radius of 0 will basically function to join these together. Similarly, you can do this here, and it will erase those lines to clean them up. All right. The trim tool works in a sort of similar way. To use the trim tool, there's a lot of things here where I'll recommend you guys select what you want to do and then start the tool. And trim tool is one of them. And I suggest you guys do that because often it's easier than starting the tool and then trying to make your selection and then going, starting the tool, trying to make selections, and then, I did it wrong, and then having to escape out and you lose your selection. I find it's easier just to do the selection and then start the tool. So TR will pull up the trim tool. You can type the whole thing out if you want. I don't know. Oh, it's right there above the fillet. So select what you want to do, start the tool, so TR, and then generally you want to only select the things you interact with, but sometimes it's easier to just select an area. If you trim too much stuff, eventually it starts getting wonky and just replaces whole areas. If I hover over this, you can see that it's using the lines that I selected as cutting surfaces, and so anything that wasn't selected, it's going to ignore. So if I was to click here, it'll preview it. It'll show me that I would erase this whole section of this line here, whereas if I come over here, it would erase that section. You can use this either by clicking and moving or by clicking and dragging, and it'll erase those. So if I wanted to get rid of these corners this way, I could also do this as well. But you'll notice that when I do that, because this line wasn't part of that selection, it deleted that whole segment. So trim is a pretty handy tool, fillets are a pretty handy tool, but you'll use them mostly to just kind of clean up lines as you're working around a project. Okay, circle generally comes up with C, and you've got a couple different placement options for it. Circle's right here, and you can see that if you click on this down arrow, you can do different placement methods. Center and radius generally works fine for me. Just pick where the center is and then set the radius at a certain direction and distance. So if I do 2'6", there's a 2'6" radius, 5' diameter. The arc, or sorry, not the arc tool, but the ellipse tool, I'll cover this one and then we'll jump back to arc. Operates in a pretty similar method. If we were to set or start the center, figure out what a 2'6" this angle is, and then the second angle. So you would basically just, what's the center, what's your angle 1, what's your angle 2, or your, sorry, not angle, your distance. So distance 1, distance 2, that generates the ellipse. Arcs are a little bit trickier. We have all these different assignment methods right here. Depending on what we're doing, so like, let me throw together just like a quick wall here. So imagine that we've got a wall, and we've got an see how trim gets weird with that little, it deleted the thing it shouldn't have. So let's say that I'm working right here. We have a door that's going to be 2'6", 1 inch, reference, and close. Okay, so we're trying to put the arc for the door in right here. There's a couple different ways you could do this. 3 points kind of a disaster, right? Like, it's kind of, what's your middle, what's your, that's not like a great line. Start, center, end works really well. So start, center, and end. If this door, let me do this to show you guys the alternative. So let's say your door is actually over here. We start the arc tool, do start, center, and then the center, and then we go up here to do the end, and you can see it's going in the wrong direction, right? If you remember back to that units, if you remember back to your units panel, we had this option for clockwise, right? Right now it's going counterclockwise, so when I start this arc tool and go start, start, center, and end, kill me. Start, center, and this mouse is dying too, that's not helping. Start, center, and then you see right there how it's going counterclockwise. It's because of that unit setting. If you want to, and just again, check down here in the box, you can see if you hold control, it'll switch directions. So if you need to switch directions with your arc tool, that's how you would do it. And then click to set the endpoint. That's the one I pretty much always use. It's just the one that makes the most sense in my head. You might need to switch just in case you've got some different angle you're measuring. But for the most part, I think that's the one that, oh, of course it jumped back on me, start, center, end. That you might have some issues running into with different things. So, fillet, circle, arc, ellipse. Rectangle tool right here. You can also type RECT and yeah. Pretty simple. You just do opposite corners. You can type it out, but I generally I'll place lines before I try and do a rectangle. Something else to note too, if I select a rectangle, look at that. It's just a polyline. We can explode it and get individual lines. So, you know, it's just AutoCAD's just working with lines. It's not that deep of a program in terms of your working units there. The other option right next to it is going to be Polygon. So, and I think that's P-O-L. Yeah. Set your number of sides, so we'll just do 6. Specify your center. Now you get this option right here for inscribed versus circumscribed. And let me draw a 4-foot 4-foot radius circle right here. And let me show you guys the difference between inscribed and circumscribed. So we're doing a polygon, 6 sides, start at the center, inscribed, and then we go out. Was it 6 feet? I already forgot. No, it's 4 feet. Okay. So there's 4 feet right there. And you saw when I was using the tool that if I change this to circumscribed, now if we go to the 4 feet, it's there. So this is the difference between an inscribed, which is basically, think of a circle, it's inside of the circle. Circumscribed, it's the exterior of the circle. So you do have those 2 different ways that you can set up a polygon like that. All right. Hatch tool. That's going to be the one that's right here, or just HA for the, oops. HA will bring up the hatch tool. This lets you place a hatch or a fill in, it will fill an area or surface or whatever. You have a couple different options here that you can use as patterns. Because these are generally kind of scaled weird, sometimes you might need to come in here and change the scale. So you can set this to, you know, 5x if it needs to be really big bricks. You can change the angle if you need to. So if they need to be tilted for whatever reason, I mean, that's too much of an angle. Come on, there we go. So if they need to be at an angle for some reason, you can do that. Once you're done, click the close creation. This is also how we'll do fill. So if you scroll up in this area here, you can get to solid and then pick points, and you can click on areas to fill. And then once you're done, you can close creation. Now, because these were created all at once, they're part of the same hatch. If I was to create another hatch, let's say I do that one, and then another one, it's not going to recognize that. So this hatch is completely separate from this one. You can break them apart. I think they count as joins. So if I explode it, maybe not. I don't know. I swear I could mess around with these somehow. Oh, that's right. The solids can't be unjoined, but the patterns can. So if I wanted to take this, I could unjoin this, or sorry, I can explode it. Let me change that in notes. And now each of these is its own individual line. If you wanted to do that, not many cases where you'd want to, unless you wanted very specifically to remove stuff and it would just look weird. Okay, so let's get rid of some of this that we have here and we'll mess around with this. So there we go. All right, so I've got this door in my fake wall right here. Let's say that we wanted to move this around. So what I could do is I could do a selection here. Notice I'm doing a left to right selection, and I'm only going around the edge of this door. If I was to do a selection this way, I'd grab parts of this wall too, which I don't want to do. So I'm going to go left to right, grab the door, and then let's say I wanted to move this to the other side of the wall. So one option I have is I could do M, which brings up the move, and then you would click on a base point and then a movement point. So I could move it like that from basically point A to point B. Something else that comes in handy from time to time is often you guys will be working in an area where you try and do a move like this, and maybe it's snapping to a bunch of stuff and you can't quite get it to where you want it to go. So one of my suggestions is, if you're going to do that, don't reference here, reference here. And all I have to do is come outside of my model in a different area, and I can do 6 inches down, and it ends up in that same spot. So you don't always necessarily have to use these base points and the displacement points to do something. Move outside of the model where you have free space. In fact, like even sometimes when I'm doing lines, if I start a line, I may move the line all the way out here, even if I'm only going 6 inches. And I'll get really big about this when we're working in SketchUp, because SketchUp's even more notorious for kicking you out. Okay, so that's a move, is just select what you want. M, enter, base point, and then second point. And that gets you kind of base however you need to move. Another option is rotate. So we can select this, do RO, select a base point, and we can rotate it in different directions. You can type the direction you want to go as well. So if I want to type 90, it'll rotate that 90 degrees, just like with the move tool. I guess I should point that out. You can specify, well, I guess, say you can do 6 inches, like typing it with a direction, just like drawing a line tool. So yeah, rotate. You can also designate it as a copy as well. So if I do RO, we'll specify that as our base point. See, that mouse is dying. And then we can do a copy and say flip it like that. So there's different ways where you can kind of mess with how you draw or how you rotate things. Another one is copy. So if I was to select this right here, do CO, we could move and copy this, and it's going to create a copy. When I do that, it's going to create a whole bunch of copies. This is something where later on we'll get into blocks and creating things, but early on, copying might be something where I take this corner and then maybe I've got a bunch of doors around my house. So I'll place one of these doors on each place where a door goes, and then all I have to do is come in here and rotate it to the correct angle that it needs to be at. All right. Another option within copy is if we do CO, choose our point, and then hit array, we could do this where we have an array where we copy multiple of these out in a direction. So if I do something like 6 feet, now we have a copy of the door every 6 feet. More handy when you're doing something like columns, or maybe you've got a series of windows that are a fixed gap along a huge wall. That can save you a bit of time in placing doors and windows, again, only if they're in kind of a fixed pattern. Okay, an array, I don't use arrays too much. They're kind of a weird thing to use. You've got a couple settings up here, so we can change things like the number of columns, we can change the number of rows, we can change the space between, so maybe they're only going to be 2'6", so they're right up against each other. So you can do stuff with arrays. I generally find, like, by the time I've figured out how to do the array, I've already done a copy this direction, and then I've done CO, click, array, 5, and 3 foot, and I've already done what I would do with the array tool with the copy tool. So it kind of just depends on what you prefer. There's a couple other settings in the array as well. So you can do polar, which is rotational, or path, which we were kind of doing. Rectangular is that grid. So if we were to do a polar one, we could specify the center. You can change the number of items it does. So there's different settings in here. It's kind of an interesting tool, but it's an interesting tool that I generally don't use a lot. So I don't, yeah, it's a personal way that I operate, that I don't use the array tool much. But it does have some cool stuff. I'm sure someone does something cool with it. Okay, so let's go back here. We have this door right here. Next is the mirror tool. And the mirror tool is pretty cool because let's say I've got this door, but it's on the wrong side. So I can do MI for mirror, and then I can reference this center point, and if I move out this way, it'll mirror it across the wall, and then it'll give me this prompt of erase source object. So if I hit yes, this is basically just me moving this door from one side of that wall to the other. Now, it's not as easy to kind of flip this around. You can't just kind of get a midpoint, imaginary midpoint reference there. But I've had no qualms with just sort of drawing a temporary line, running the mirror, snapping to that midpoint, and that's how I do a lot of quick movements with things. So that's the mirror tool. It has a lot of uses. Again, we'll get into kind of mirror tool and copy and some other stuff in other lectures. Okay, so that's a lot of the model space stuff. Let's get into paper space real quick, and then we'll close this out. So clicking over to the layout one right here, you can see that this is that initial paper space window. In paper space, you have what are called viewports. This is the viewport right here. You can select it and delete it. You can also type viewports, and it'll open up this viewports window where you can create a new viewport. So if you go to single right here, we get a prompt. We can place a viewport like that. We can also do single, and then we can use this F button right here to fit, and it'll fill the whole screen. Those are useful in different ways, but for the most part, we're generally going to be, what I typically end up doing is just sort of taking one small window, and then we'll do a copy, array, maybe 6, and then placing them down like that. And you can get a whole bunch of viewports fit in a page very quickly. Obviously, I'd probably format them better. So, let me tell you guys about the paper space model space viewport trap. So to get into this viewport, which I'm out of right now, I'm in paper space. To get into this viewport and modify it, I would double click in it, and you can see that this border gets bold. So I'm now in the viewport, and I can zoom around. In here, now that I'm set into this viewport, I can also come down here where there's this weird number. I can click on this, and I can change the scale. So now I can set my scale for this area to 1/4 inch equals 1 foot, and now I'm set there. I can also, with this right here, I can lock the viewport, and if I double click out of there, I can get away from this. So often what you end up doing is coming in here, setting a viewport to show off our fancy door. Let's also get in here and turn off that grid. Now, I've got this right here, and let's do a CO. We'll do that and that. So now we've got 2 viewports up here. And then let's say you want to go in here to change this. You double clicked, and oh, well, wait a second. Now I'm stuck in this viewport. If I zoom in or out, I can't, because I'm zooming in the viewport. I don't have an area outside of it to click on. All you have to do to get out of this is click on this thing that says model right here, and it snaps you back to paper space, and now you can zoom out. So that's what I call a viewport trap. It's going to happen to you guys, a lot of you guys, at some point. So I want to make sure you guys are aware of it. Let's see, checking my list. Oh, you can also type P space. So if I'm in here, I can just type P space, and it'll get me out of that viewport as well. All right, layers and layer override. So this is the last big thing we're going to cover, and this is kind of in depth, and I want to go over this a little bit slowly so we know what we're talking about here. So if you click on this layer properties box, we get this menu right here. And if you're on a Mac and you're watching this, this is going to be a very different box for you in certain ways. So this is going to be kind of a PC only version of this, but I want to go over this kind of in detail. So right here, we have the new button. If I want to create a new layer, I can click on that, and we'll call this walls, and I can create a new one, and we'll call this floors, doesn't matter. But that's how you create a new layer, all right? Layer 0 is your default, and I can't really explain like the full, like what could happen, or I'll be here for 30 minutes. But you always want to work on your 0 layer, and it has to do with some weird effects that can happen unintentionally if you build stuff on different layers, group it, ship it as a block, and then it ends up in another project, all right? Or even just in your normal project. And I've seen people who like turned off one layer and all their doors disappeared that were on an, you know, just, it was because they built on whatever that initial layer was, and those just weird things happen. So always build on your 0 layer, and then you want to move things to other layers. So we've added these walls and floors layers. We can change the color. So let's set our walls to green. Hit OK. We'll set our floors to blue. So we can just change these color settings for the... That wasn't the blue I wanted. Okay. So we've changed the color of those. Now if we come back in our model space, you can see everything here. Right here is going to be white. And so to change the layers that things are on, I'm going to select them. I'll come up to this drop down, and then I will click on the layer that I want to move that to. So actually, let's change this to doors. Okay. So now this is my door. It's part of the doors layer, so I will move this to my doors. Why did that? I don't know why that didn't assign that. Okay. So you can see now we've got this on, my walls are on my walls layer, my door is on my doors layer. There's a couple other things that I want to highlight with this. So when you look at this menu, you can see that we've got a couple settings. We've got this light bulb, a sun that's on the bottom corner of a weird box, and a lock. So this turns the layer on and off, but oops, let's not do 0 layer. But it's going to hide it everywhere. All right. This just hides it, but it keeps it in memory. This freeze right here is going to remove this and remove and get it out of memory. It's a subtle difference that kind of like only matters if you're working on gigantic projects with older computers. For all intents and purposes, these two buttons do the same thing, but if either of them is off, your thing isn't going to be visible, okay? This other one here is freeze or thaw in current viewport, and you can see if I click on it right now, nothing's happening. When it matters is if I double click in here, and I go freeze my doors in that viewport. So you can see my doors are still visible, walls are still visible, but the door is just not visible in this one viewport. It's a viewport specific setting, and more typically what you'll use this for is to filter things. So we might have certain symbols or dimensions, different things that we'll use in different CAD drawings of the floor plan, but we'll hide things or filter them with these freeze and thaws right here, okay? And then obviously this other one is just lock. It locks the layer so you can't make any changes to it. But there's one hidden setting I want to warn you guys about as well. So if you're here in the layer properties, I had a student who could not print something. She would go to print and her walls were gone. And somehow she had unchecked the plot option right here for her walls. And so every time everything looked completely normal. And we'd look at the layers right here, everything looks fine, everything looks good. And then we'd go to print and her walls wouldn't be there. And it was because somehow and this is easy to see now because we only have 3 layers, but once you have 40, 50, 100 layers, it's something that you just don't see really. And it's only in this menu. And somehow she had checked this box that had set this, had unchecked her walls from plot. So if you are seeing something not coming up, check your plot setting right here for that. And then let me show you guys one other trick too. So if we set viewports as its own layer, something I do out of habit is I do this really annoying fuchsia color for anything that's not supposed to print. And that helps me recognize when I have something visible that shouldn't be printed. So I could check that box, but also I want things to be visible in certain ways. So what I'll do is I'll move all my viewports to a viewport layer. And then I guess this would be one difference where if we were to freeze or thaw, no, it's just going to remove the lines. So I can hide the borders of the viewports like that just by turning the layer on or off. It makes the viewport border invisible, but I can still double click here and go in and change settings of this viewport and then get out. So that's one way that I actually manage my display settings when we're doing things like elevations and whatnot. Okay, so let's talk about layer. That's layers. Let's talk about layer overrides, which is this next box right here. Um, Anytime you're working in here, you generally want to set your defaults and then work with your defaults. So right now, if I was to select this line, everything's by layer, by layer, by layer. Occasionally, you will run into things where there is an exception. So let's just say that we have this right here. This is our exception, and this is some part of a wall. Come on. This is part of my walls, but it's also overhead, right? It's above my head, so I would indicate that with a dashed line. Well, I could create a whole new wall or a new layer for my walls that's overhead, or I can come in and I can set a custom line property right here, line type. So I would go to other, and then we would load and get ready to see this menu a bit more often in follow-up lectures. But I can select this right here, and then, come on, I can apply that new line type here. And if that scale is off, let's see, it's LT scale, and then we'll do 32, and there we go. So now I've got this dashed in a way that I want, or that is fine for this. So it still counts as my walls. I probably wouldn't hide my walls layer, but if this was like part of furniture or something, I'd want to set this very specific area to still be part of my wall group, but to have this unique property for the line type, okay? For some reason too, you can also change the colors. I've generally not found a reason to do this. But I would highly recommend doing group level settings first, because we do have the line type and line weight settings here. So if I wanted all my lines to be this dashed, I could do that. And all of these are now dashed. Generally, you don't want to do that, so we would leave this in continuous. And then the one exception is going to be this layer right here, or this set of lines right here that are different. So that will save you guys time. So generally, again, work within a pattern and then make exceptions. Don't make everything an exception. Or worse, don't have everything on layer 0 and then you've manually colored everything by setting values here. That's an absolute nightmare, and I won't be happy if I see that. Okay. Let me just double check. I believe we've covered everything here. That should be everything that's on the list. Okay, so that's this whole lecture. We'll get into kind of building a small space in the next video.